Satisfactory has beaten me. We've all been there. If you've played games like Factorio, Dyson Sphere Program, Satisfactory, or even just games that take a lot of time with some degree of creative freedom, you've probably burnt out a few times, maybe more than a few times. Now you've reached that stage where it all becomes a bit too much to manage, and you can't shake that feeling that if you just started again, knowing what you know now, you could do this a lot better. And that's where I'm at right now. This world started during the experimental stages of Satisfactory Update 6, has become a little bit too unwieldy, full of small mistakes and overambitious projects that were just never finished. There are many suboptimal choices that were certainly fun, like building a 13-carriage freight train to carry oil halfway across the world, where, if that train runs late just by 80 seconds, the entire power network fails, and that train doesn't run at all. That's actually never happened, but every time I add a new train to the same network, I always have that stressful moment of hoping I'm not breaking that 80-second delay rule that I ultimately imposed on myself. So, this video is going to be the final part of my Satisfactory series, and I'm going to do a quick tour of my factories and talk a little bit about why my biggest project ever, combined with some other external factors, is ultimately what led to the end of this series. But if you like Satisfactory content from me, you got nothing to worry about. I'm going to be starting a brand new series here in Update 8 next week, and progressing through the game again, albeit much faster and with full build guides on how to recreate exactly what I've done, as I know for many, that was something that people wanted more of. Now, what are the dimensions exactly, the exact resource counts, and how to make it look relatively good without losing 30 hours of game time to just get some nice looking windows. So what's the difference this time around? Well, two big things will progress the series faster. Number one, I'm much better at the game now. When I'd started the series, I was familiar with it, but still quite a novice. Now I feel like I truly understand the game's intricacies and its best practices. I don't need to do as much trial and error, and I'm not going to be going blind into the progression, not knowing how much I'm going to need for future tiers. I'm still not an expert on everything, like the alternate recipes, so I won't be doing super optimal playthrough, but it should be quite efficient, with much more deliberate decisions when it comes to transport and production volume. The second big thing that will speed me up is blueprints. Blueprints will be in the series from Tier 4, and I've learned a lot designing previous blueprints and where they can save you huge amounts of time. Roads, rails, walkways, bridges, mining outposts, truck stops, even large factory floors can all be set up instantly now, so this is going to rapidly improve the speed of the series, as well as just help the aesthetics of buildings. I don't have to redo the same window 20 times over. Now I can just blueprint it and slam them down. This, of course, was a feature that made its way over to my series around episode 35 or so, when it was in experimental for Update 7, but unlike last time, I won't have to really learn its limitations, or learn what will and won't work, or start designing out blueprints. I already have a bunch that I've already made, and then I could just kind of slightly tweak or redesign them to make sure they fit with the type of building style that I'll be going for in future. So it'll just be great to have it as a foundation much earlier on in the series. And of course, with Update 8, we can just delete those blueprints if we want to get rid of something and put some new stuff down. So you might be wondering where I'm going to be starting. I will be starting over again from Tier 1, and starting again in grassy fields. I did consider starting later or in different locations, because you can do that in Update 8, you can kind of switch what tier you actually begin at, but I do want this just to be a definitive series for people who are just new to Satisfactory. I want to turn those beginners into advanced players quickly over the course of just a few episodes by explaining and showcasing those fundamentals that are just often lost on people, and this really is the best way to do that. Unlike the previous series though, we will be pushing through progression way faster now. I've created a progression map for myself of what each episode should focus on, and I'm hoping to have less big builds take up 3 or 4 episodes. They should be condensed down a bit. Instead, there should be more editing, but there will be a lot more explanation on screen as mentioned to the sizes, dimensions of rooms, and overall layout of builds, so hopefully with those edits, nothing will be missed. At least not any critical information to how the build was put together. Anyways, this is all going to begin next week, with each episode dropping on Tuesdays with early access for channel members. For the rest of this video, we're just going to walk on a tour of the factories using Update 8, and I want to explain some of my proudest builds and some of my worst ideas too. Also, as promised, now that the series is done, you can download the save file from the description and all of my blueprints from it too to play around with for yourself. They don't require mods, and they work with Update 8. Alright, so that was a lot. Without further delay, let's walk around one last time. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, to kick off the first leg of the tour, we're going to go through things in a rather linear fashion. Now, not every factory I ever built is still standing to this day. Some of them, of course, were torn down, but the first factory remains, as that is something that people asked me to keep, and I appreciate that, because it's nice going in there now. It's humbling in many ways. So, effectively, what we have... I should just quickly pop in here just to mention that I'm currently sick. I'm fighting it as hard as I can, but I just had a massive coughing fit right there at the beginning. I'm largely okay, I'm mostly over it, but that's just one of the reasons that this video has taken even just a little bit longer than I would have liked to get going and to be released to you guys. Anyways, so what we're going to have a look at is the first factory here, the Iron Cube. Of course, at Tier 1, we didn't have any of the materials and things I needed from the Awesome Shop to build windows or different materials or anything like that, so I ended up just building a very basic box to house our lovely machines. But you can see, even early on, I had sort of ideas of how to use the asphalt as walkways, concrete as like sort of a separate factory area. I think I ended up inverting that in later builds where we have concrete as the walkable areas, and then the factories themselves or the machines were built on asphalt. Effectively, we don't have to go through everything in this factory. It's a very simple, basic factory, but I just love seeing that even at the very beginning, I had the ideas of we should sink the resources down below the floors so we don't see conveyor belts too much. That sort of changed a little bit here because I decided to keep some of the iron rods in a separate container over there, just so I could pull from it later on because we needed a lot of them. And I actually got most of my iron rods from here throughout the entire playthrough. In fact, a lot of reinforced iron plates, the smart plating, and the modular frames all came from here for a very long time. Now, of course, with later builds, I would build the rotors or the modular frames or whatever into those factories, but this served as a place I could go to grab them myself for my personal use and personal crafting. We can also see, because we're in Update 8 and we've got global illumination, of course, and the vegetation is regrown, we have this sort of abandoned factory feel to a lot of these places, which is really cool. If you play around with the save file yourself and you want to kind of explore around, it really does feel like, ooh, like I'm visiting some old abandoned derelict factory. So I just kind of like that. These are also Tier 1. They stayed as Tier 1 the entire time, Minor Mark 1. Never upgraded this factory because I didn't really leave myself any headroom of where to build onto it. And that's actually something I'm going to be doing a lot of in the new series, I hope, is sort of planning not quite modular factories, but giving space in mind for the fact that, hey, eventually this will become a Mark II miner, and we know how much we're going to get out of it then. It'll be a Mark III miner. We know how much that's going to give us, and this is the belt speed we have. So I won't be able to fully plan and design out late game factories early on. That'd be a waste of time, but definitely have it in mind that, okay, this place should be built onto in future, so leave it the room to have that kind of capability. And that's really it for this factory. I don't want to go in and go break it down tier by tier and floor by floor and machine by machine, because of course we'd be here forever doing that for every single build. That's what the save file is for if you really want to see everything that happened with each factory. But it's kind of nice just to visit these places and see just a little bit of what some of the design ideas I had early on and how they stayed with me throughout the series. Of course, just up on top, it's worth mentioning we have the hub. We had very beginnings and the late stages, I should say, of the biomass conversion area that I had. So, you know, you feed in leaves or whatever and it kind of turns it into biomass. So that's kind of what this area did up here. And then there's just some containers full of fuel and stuff that I ended up just leaving here. So yep, that's basically it. Let's move on to our next factory now. So, the next factory we have lined up is my steel refinery. So, this one was an interesting one. First time using coal to mix it with iron to produce steel. And this factory actually got itself a little bit of a facelift a little later on. So, I changed the materials to be metal to kind of reflect the fact that it was a steel building. And it produces steel here. Added some color to the place just to brighten it up and test things out, and then also some skylights in on the top once we had unlocked them. So it was more just me playing around with some of the aesthetic choices before doing it on a new build. I don't think I ever showed it off in a video because of that, because I was just testing things out. But it turns out to be a good idea. With this update, of course, having the new global illumination, the skylights, and all the different windows look pretty good, and the bright colors really set it apart. So grabbing coal from down there, pumping it along all the way up this kind of makeshift elevator, and then straight in here. Imagine taking this little ladder up to get in as well. But yeah, we can just have a little look around. So we had our first layer of foundries. You can see we're getting some overgrowth in here as well. Our first layer of foundries here, just being fed manifold style in opposite directions. So there's iron nodes over there in the corner feeding from left to right, and the coal is coming up from the bottom right, from right to left. So this is a hard one to explain because there's a lot going on in this room that's really heavily compressed. There's vegetation growing all over it now and everything, but effectively what we have is steel, our ingots, moving along this way, going into a bunch of constructors, making steel beams. So they're all pretty much making steel beams. Oops, excuse me, sorry I fell. And that's then going into the left side here, which is making encased industrial beams. So in the corner, there's a nice little limestone node that mixes with concrete there, into this assembler with the steel beams, and then we get encased industrial beams that are coming out just over there. Now, some of them are going into the container, but when the container is full, they then dart along away into an awesome sink, which is over in the corner over there. But effectively, the other ones, like I said, are just doing steel beams, or sorry, steel pipes. So these are the steel pipes. It's really messy what's going on here, but effectively, again, some of them go into a container, some go to the awesome sink, and the rest get fed along this way to go into an assembler over this way. And before we look at those assemblers, there's a whole separate room to this factory, which is basically all focused on copper. Actually quite a cool looking skylight with the new lighting now as well. So effectively, down here, we have our copper node, banging out the copper ore, and that's being made into cable and wire. So wire and cable are coming out of this place, back into the main room if you want to think of it that way. And in here, the cable, well, let's follow the steel beams first. So the steel beams, or sorry, pipes, God, I keep messing that up. The steel pipes are being mixed with the wire in here to produce stators, and the stators are going around then to be mixed with the cable to make automated wiring. And the wiring then is there, just traveling into one of the boxes, and if the box is full, into the awesome sink. So a lot of things kind of come into that awesome sink from all different directions. So it's a pretty messy factory to kind of keep track of from that way. It's really chaotically built, and that's because it started out with just steel, and then all that other stuff was kind of added later. But that's effectively it. That is my little steel foundry, and it has a little exit out the other side, which will lead me on nicely to our next factory. In fact, we can just continue and just run right over to it. This is the motor factory. 15 motors per minute. I actually remember what this place did. I remember kicking off the episode from down here. So this is one of the first builds where I was like, okay, let's try to make something that actually looks good. We'll build it a little offset. Different like heights for different floors using pillars, and sort of trying to achieve this brutalist look by having the pillars be exposed on the outside of the walls rather than on the inside or underneath. So I quite like it. I still think it's an aesthetically pleasing factory because it's just so random, right? It's like random boxes and rectangles all over the place, and the lighting of the game just makes that look really good. So let's just follow inside really quickly. I might have to turn on the flashlight for this one. So we start off where we're gathering our ore down on the bottom floor. And if we continue up, we then have just an ability to turn those on and off. Our first use of signs start taking shape here with the motor factory. So logistics floor. And this is where we have the first proper dedicated floor to just doing logistics. But I would say something I learned later is it's probably not tall enough. It's a little cramped down here. Needs just another wall height of foundations, I think, to give it a bit of space. But we have a nice asphalt to guide us around this way to the eastern exit and the eastern iron mines and miners. Few first uses of patterns on the floor and things like that, but overall quite an orderly factory. Good structure to it, I think. Again, just separate rooms with their own little containers for various iron mines and things like that. But I think one of my biggest learnings from this particular factory was that I didn't have an easy way of getting around it. As you can see, we're running all over the place just to kind of follow around. So that's a problem where you build the floors and figure out all the logistics first, but you don't think of how the player is actually really going to navigate it. So, smeltery and rod production. So we basically have all the foundries there, making the iron ingots, and then everything here, compressing them to make various other things. But this is also where I had the first idea to have a glass wall showcasing what's being made on this floor going up to the floor above us, to the next logistics floor. So on the left side here, we know this place is making rods, basically just tons and tons of rods, and it's all going upstairs. This side is all doing wire. Well, that was weird to say wire, and that's because of obviously the copper smeltery and all that kind of stuff that's on this side. So I'm just going to dart across it really quickly. I remember hopping outside here, a separate little compartment for where copper production is housed. We could turn off that stuff here, 120 per minute. Started learning, yeah, you might want to actually write down on these signs what this place makes, because in the far-flung future when you revisit it, it's good to know. So again, just a little enclosure with all our little foundries buried underneath, and that stuff is all then being fed back into the main factory floor. So that's wire production, and we know that then that's obviously going to be combined with the rods, and that's going up to the next floor. So as you can see, quite a pain navigating this place. You have to run around quite a lot just to get to where you want to go. So we'll just hop over to the stairs, try to run through the place really quickly. So our staircase is here at the back. I think this just leads outside, does it? Yeah. And we have our little balcony area here, I guess. It's kind of nice doing the balconies like this. We had, I think I put in some ramps later on with this type of thing. Yeah, down there. So a nice way of just kind of breaking things up so you can kind of walk outside at various places, get out of the factory if you need to. But this is where it was really messy. So it's like, okay, you have our logistics floor similar to the one below, and then our stairs is over this way. Really awkward to kind of get up and around and get out of here. The lighting, though, I gotta say, is really doing the heavy lifting, making the place look quite nice. So screw production here, a floor dedicated to just a similar sort of thing, all constructors, and then we can just see screws flying up on our little glass wall over there. Again, first time trying to make use of power switches so we can power down an entire floor if I need to. And then we just move up again to another logistics floor here on the outside. And this is actually in combination with the sulfur factory over on the far side, because some copper or coal is coming in from there. If we go up further, and this is where it actually gets pretty intense over there with lots of rotors and stuff, but it's all just belts. So that's where we have the foundries making steel. Just a little bit of steel was needed for this place. We're making in steel pipes in these constructors. I think we're making rotors in this little batch over here. I think we're making stators in this batch over here, and it's all being combined in the final 3 assemblers to make the motors. And that is the 15 motors per minute factory. And then as you can see, very lazily just throwing that into an awesome sink, but I did carve out a hole in the roof, or in the ceiling, just for that to have its own like kind of thing poking through it, which is kind of nice. So that's that. That's effectively the motor factory. We'll just continue the tour. I'm going to head on down to the sulfur area now. So the sulfur area down this way was the most neglected. I would hesitate to call it even a factory. It's more just a platform with machines on it that grew over time when I needed it. So it was just one sulfur mine. I don't think I ever got sulfur anywhere else that I can think of off the top of my head. I think this is the only place that does it. And we upgraded it a couple times. Sorry, I should slur my words. It's all that drinking that I've been doing. So effectively, yeah, we upgraded it a couple of times, and we added a few more machines, and we changed it to making more compact coal than what it was making before, so that we could ship it off to my oil facility. So it's pretty straightforward. It's just really, oh yeah, we used to make the explosives here, black powder and other things like that, the obelisks, but it's really now just compact coal, and that just gets loaded into a train station. Very straightforward. So I think we'll save going to, well, Blue Crater's right over there, so I think we'll pay that a little visit and see what's happening just over there in the distance. Alright, so we're basically just down now by the Blue Crater oil section. So we know that down in this part of the map, this is where we decided to set up the, and I say we, I shouldn't tar you with that brush and blame you. Most people said it was crazy talk. But this is where I decided that I was going to build an oil train that we just saw go by with 13 carriages, taking oil all the way from here to the west side of the map to our oil facility. I really like the look of this place. I was quite happy with it. I think I've put a bit more time into making sure the lighting and everything looked good in the evening. And the biome, the lighting of this biome itself looks quite nice. Especially when you get down there, that sort of pink purplish hue to the fog can look quite good. So we'll just really quickly, we have coated concrete along the sides, pillars, different variety of windows. I like to use the, I don't know what necessarily you call those windows, but the ones that have like lots of different little windows in them. They seem really good for railway stations, and then have these skylights and stuff. So this is kind of mirrored off the oil rig, or sorry, the oil processing plant that I did, which we'll get to. Obviously by this stage the oil processing plant was built. Did we number these? Oh, I did actually, yeah. So yeah, these are importantly numbered actually, because in the, it's kind of interesting how I had to kind of make concessions for pillars and things. That actually looks pretty good, I think. We have lighting along the sides here. So these are numbered because in the pump tower, there's actually quite a lot that you have to deal with. So again, using more signs, you can see by this stage in the game, definitely getting better with cleaner aesthetics, I think, overall. And then somewhere like down here, this is where the numbers actually matter. So we have pipe maintenance, a little room just for the pioneer, not for the visitors. And oh, the lights have actually just come on. It's now the evening, so that works out well. So yeah, we have pumps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, or pipes I should say, with their various valves stationed alongside them so that we can access them and see how they're all doing. So I love seeing that. It actually looks really good. God damn, this update is so nice for graphics. Very early on in the series, I said two things. I was like, I really hope they add blueprints. People were like, nah, they said they're not going to do it. And then I said, I hope they add ray tracing. And people were like, you're crazy. Why would you need ray tracing in this game? And I don't think it is quite ray tracing. I mean, it kind of is. It's global illumination. Lumen. It's certainly achieving the same look what I wanted, right? So all good. But anyway, we can see down here in this little undercroft that we have the different numbers on our pipes that are being fed up. So that's just an easy way to kind of see which ones are doing what. So again, looks quite good. Again, the lights are tinted purplish hue, which is just something that I said was inspired from my dad's personal office building where he had a warehouse with those type of lights in it. So I'll probably maintain that. Now if we fall all the way down, get down to the bottom here, we have naming even on our lights. The pumps are working overtime. That one pump on the left doesn't really need to work, but it can do if it needs to. And then the various numbers, again, telling us what each one is doing. So you can see it getting a lot better with labeling. I think by the final factory, you'll see that labeling was perhaps the best it's ever been. And actually, I would say setting a standard among Satisfactory players in some way, because I really developed a system for labeling that I think is really good that I'll be carrying into the next series for sure by the end with the color schemes. Alright, so this actually brings me to one of my favorite locations in the entire save, and that's just because of how the lighting looks in this area and how kind of the fog makes our platform in the distance just really look like it's got a lot of scale to it. I don't know how to best describe it, but it looks very natural, very realistic, I guess. And it actually looked that way before the recent lighting update as well, so I'm glad to see it still looks as good. Now, another thing that I think really brings this place to life is the fact that some of the drilling rigs are positioned outside of our little sheltered area. And that little sheltered area has its own lights and walkways and things to kind of come through. It has its own support pillars. So stuff like that are cosmetics that I'd still like to do in the save going forward, because it just feels quite realistic to have a shelter that continues but doesn't go all the way. If you ever see real factories or, I don't know, real building sites and things, it's often like that. It's not like they built everything everywhere all the time. It's just for the most part. And there's something quite nice about that. I could have covered the whole thing, but that just wouldn't have looked as good, I don't think. Then we also have the combination of the first time I ever used this sort of walkway slash hybrid transport thing. So it's effectively a big walkway, but underneath in the metal frames we have... Oh, there's enemies here. We have the pipes traveling underneath. So I just thought it was a really nice... It's just one of my best pieces of work. It's just a very simple walkway with metal edges kind of covering it up on the sides. We have the power lines traveling nicely underneath it, the pillars supporting it, and then effectively the pipes running down into where they need to go. Maybe it doesn't look as good there, but other than that, it looks pretty nice. And I ended up using this type of bridge many times over in the future because it was blueprinted. And that's effectively it for Blue Crater Oil, one of my favorite places in my save so far. So one of the factories I glossed over that was done in between the ones I showed you was this. This is the screw factory. Now this is built opposite the iron factory, and I think it was done around the time I had hit coal power. So fairly early on still. And it was actually originally, if you remember, a little bit bigger than it is now. And that's because I got an alternate recipe later on, which meant I could cut out an entire floor of production. So there was one floor stacked above this one, which is why it looks kind of weird at the moment. Because it was just literally just chopped away. And then I put in a truck station on the top floor and just had a road go off so it could deliver the screws somewhere else. So it's quite an interesting build for two reasons, I think so anyway, and that's because it's the first time I used hypertubes, and I decided to make a sort of a hypertube elevator wall, you know, sort of like you just pick the one you want to go to by looking at the sign, and then at the back I've tried to hide as much of it away as possible. So we have all the hypertubes here overlapping each other. They're all going straight though. That was just something I wanted to do to make it look like they're all feeding into the same pipes. but then all the wiring is hidden back here as well. So I was trying to make it as clean as possible, have the signs to let you know where you're going to go, which floor you're on right now. And it's nice on the bottom floor, it just goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but up a bit further, you know, the numbers get a bit staggered and a bit more messy, and obviously it's super, super loud having them right next to each other like that, and you can't do anything about that other than lowering the sound of all of them. But I just thought it was kind of cool to reflect on that little hypertube, the first use of hypertubes, really, and I've still never really been a big fan of hypertubes. The other thing that's interesting is, it's one of the first factories I built where trucks were being used to deliver ore. So, effectively, maybe I should get out of the way of the road actually, just really quickly. Here we are at the screw factory, and just above me we can see a truck pulling away from iron extraction. Now, it's a little deceptive. There's actually 2 iron extractors here. So there's one building on the top and one building on the bottom, with both of which have their own truck stations. So this truck pulls into both separately, and then does a little loop and comes around and delivers the iron ore here. Now, the reason that's interesting is because you could actually change the recipes of all these constructors above to make different things. It's kind of a modular factory in that way, and that was pointed out to me. It wasn't designed that way, but people were like, huh, it's interesting. You could kind of change what this place makes if you wanted it to just make something else, and that's kind of cool. And later on, like I said, because we chopped away a floor, it is a kind of a dynamic shaped building. But that's effectively it for the screw factory. Oh my god, look how good this looks. This looks so nice. I don't mean what I've built, I just mean the world. It looks awesome. Alright, so here we are. The first automation of power. An exciting time in any pioneer's journey, as it means you no longer have to run back and forth constantly with biomass or other plant-based materials to keep your power running. This is the first time where you can finally automate power and just let it do its own thing. So, we had set up coal generators to do that. I think initially I'd started with 4 or maybe 8. So that means it was the first use of fluid dynamics. We had to pump water from this little basin down here all the way up using these kind of strange looking right angles, fed into a mini pump house, and then piped along and fed into the coal generators themselves. And of course, the coal deposits are just over here at the back, and then they're subsequently fed in as well. So very straightforward, nothing too crazy, but later it got a little bit more ambitious because we added more miners on, more generators, and then eventually made this sort of walkway bridge to go all the way along here and create the coal rig. So the idea was to create something for the first time that was kind of creative, something I hadn't quite seen before at the time, I don't think. And that was effectively just to try and make an oil drilling rig platform, but for coal. So coal is just effectively not piped, but delivered in through one belt. On the bottom, we have just a series of water extractors, and then everything is being piped up using makeshift pumps. So all of it gets pumped up, the coal gets distributed to all of these different generators, and the generators are packed in very closely to each other. It was really difficult to actually get the shape right the first time around, so that regardless of the angle, the chimneys are all sticking out, so they're not being blocked by their own chimney stacks. They're being built right on top of each other, but of course you're not allowed to build them on top of each other because of the pipes, or sorry, the chimney stacks. So the only way to do it was to overlap them at offset angles, and that way the stacks just protruded at the different sides. So kind of an interesting, nice little build there, and it was using curved pipes for the first time as well, just kind of bending the pipes slightly as they fed up, and people kind of like that too. Don't know why excuse me, I stopped doing that, because it does actually look kind of nice, but I think the more angular right angle pipes going straight up can also work and be a bit cleaner to some degree. And that's effectively it. I can't remember the exact power output of this place, but that was quite cool. It kept us going for quite a long time until we had to work towards oil power. And that, of course, leads us to the oil processing plant, a behemoth of a building. This, of course, was not built all at once. This was built over many different stages as we added onto it constantly to receive more and more power. So there's this whole expansion here, which is just rows of fuel generators, as we can see, jutting out. But I think it started from humble beginnings, just over around this corner here. Yeah, so just down here. It largely actually kept the same shape the whole time, because we just added onto it in a sort of modular fashion. Again, another nice looking building, because it is just rectangles stacked on top of each other in different proportions and different offsets. So effectively, we come into the main foyer here. So coming into the foyer, which has obviously changed multiple times, you can see the first use of the I guess, metal beams being used to kind of break up the concrete a little bit, just a little bit of flair to the area to make it look a bit nicer, so it's not just giant concrete walls all the time. This is really nice and easy to do. It doesn't take long to do it. You just kind of paint a beam all the way across and it can look quite good, especially at the bottom. I feel like it just has a nice kind of break point between the wall and the ground. And of course, we used glass walkways for one of the first times here as well, so we could actually see what's happening underneath, which is more useful further down where we have actual flow rates on belts. Of course, we can't see what's going on inside pipes, but it's nice to know where they're going, even just that. First time using signs to denote the productivity of an actual machine, so now I don't have to look at 20 machines wondering which one is the one that's underclocked or overclocked. We've just written down on the machine itself, as it were. And then also breaking those machines into groups so that we can see. I don't know what's going on with the 2D image here, but it's not loaded correctly. Perhaps that needs to be fixed with the update as well. But not to spend too much time on this, we can just quickly look at where the first batch of oil actually came from. Is it in there? No, it was over here. Yeah, so it's oil extractions. This is the first oil node that we tapped. Oil flows along again underneath the floors, trying to keep things looking fairly clean. And it actually flows along into this area here. So it kind of comes up and it has this little valve for me to have a look at and access easily and immersively, so I can check the flow rate without having to actually do anything or click into anything. Now, people had mentioned later on, valves are a little messy, right? They mess with your flow rate. They kind of interrupt the logistics of the game slightly because fluid isn't really handled super realistically, and that'll be something I'll be definitely avoiding going forward, using too many valves. It was a big pain point initially as well in the game. Anyway, we flow oil, we bring that crude oil into these big buffers, they then flow around, so down and around here into their various machines, and that continues on, gets broken into their various parts. So we can see what every group is doing, right, because of all the different signs and things. Again, first time using color to denote what pipes are actually doing. So blue for water, yellow for fuel, red for turbo fuel, purple for heavy oil, that sort of thing, black for oil. That's where people pointed out that it's a little bit of a McDonald's color scheme going on, with the yellow and red being inverted to use turbo fuel and for regular. Then we had our first expansion to this place, which added on plastic. So 20 machines, I think, doing plastic. And then further and further out, we just kept adding things on. This is where the oil finally got delivered for the first time. So that massive oil train that comes along brings all its oil down and feeds it into a group of 10 machines each. So pipe A doing 400 fuel with extra polymer, pipe B doing the same thing, pipe C doing the same thing, and so on and so forth. Just rows of refineries that all then get separated down into rows of fuel generators, all overclocked to give us the max amount of power we can get out of these bad boys for the fuel that we're putting in. So those are the big expansions to the area. Nothing too crazy else going on with this place, but we could take the stairwell up to the transport. So yeah, let's go up to the train station, get out of that noisy factory down there, take our little skyway across to the train station. Train station obviously had to expand and get way bigger when we added on 13 carriages and fuel freight as well. Let's hop across here real quick. So you can actually see the line. I kept the old wall of where we had expanded onto. This is the original train station. So this is the train station that's then actually handling the various different things that we're putting out of this place. So it's the first time that I actually had to start organizing trains and what they were picking up and where they were going. I think this is the first time I did that. So we then just used the signs to say how many trains are coming by and picking things up. This place is doing packaged turbo fuel, plastic, it has 1 train on it, petroleum coke, 2 trains on it, and rubber. So it's nice. You know, you come back here, it's easy to know what's happening. And if we go down a floor on the opposite side, oh yeah, and it's where I also split the place into imports and exports, 2 different lines, and then imports for oil as well, which is its own separate line. So stairwell back down to the main facility. We'll just walk down a little bit, and that's where we have station logistics, right? So what's going on below the station to feed it with all this stuff? Obviously, something I'll be thinking about in the future is now adding in lights to all of these different places. I know some people play with mods to keep it daytime, but I think now it's kind of more interesting to just build with lighting in mind. So that's what I'll be trying to do in future. But effectively, this place is just pumping out huge amounts of petroleum coke and rubber, and it's just a logistics floor handling all of the oil that's coming into the place. It's just a kind of a stopgap floor for all the different materials that are being made, I guess. It's a big logistics floor for transport. We'll just go down one more floor and have a quick look at one of the last expansions to the area. excuse me, which is back to our main facility, our big hallway with windows stretching all the way down. It's the first time I overlapped windows to create thinner windows, because they're normally, this would be the size of just one, but when you overlap them, you get these kind of lines going between them. I think it looks a little bit nicer. But yeah, so what's this place called? It's the Polymer Recycling Center. So polymer resin that comes out of all that fuel that we just saw comes into here and gets made into rubber. And then all of that rubber is being shifted into that room there. Rubber, logistics, and recycling. But then also our first use of water extractors in this place properly, out on the sea, with its own little walkways being fed in. Looks really nice, I think, as well, with the skylights. Again, the lighting just making the game look so good. And it came together, it just managed to fit in and work really well, I think. So that's all been this little mini recycling room. That gets then fed up upstairs. And then we just have rubber production as well. So just another room of just massive amounts of oil coming in. And lots of... Oh, weird. The lights aren't all powered on. That's strange. Yeah, just tons of refineries, right? Just refinement central, this place. Just tons and tons of refineries everywhere, doing all sorts of things. So this place became so huge and so expansive, with so many different components to it. Lots of... And then the volume of material became crazy. So this area in particular, I remember, was a nightmare to set up, because there's so much things being shifted around, because it's all that polymer resin. You get so much out. 1,200 per minute, I think, is coming out. So multiple belts are all needed for that. And then there's the turbo fuel as well. So that fuel has to get then refined and be mixed with the compact coal, which just comes in down there from upstairs and fed along manifold style into all of these turbo refineries. Oh, and that's effectively it. So let's get out of here. So coming out of the oil factory, the next thing I think I built onto this before this area here expanded was the computer factory. So really nice, compact looking building. First time trying to make the outside of the building look good, I think. So I'd just gotten done, you know, building a fairly boxy but modular oil factory. And I was like, yeah, we could do something a bit more creative. Add on to the architecture of the outside. So building these sort of pillars, it almost looked like a building that raised itself. It looks like hydraulic suspensions in a way. Obviously that's not the case, and it turns out the building was just very small for what I wanted to have done in there. And it's been completely cleared out, so there's no point going inside of it. It's just empty rooms now. But you'll remember it was a very nice looking room, I think, where all of these assemblers were in the line and everything was kind of being fed down into them. And it just looked really nice to watch everything slowly falling into those machines there. But ultimately, a bad design overall, because it was just too small. It didn't really think about what was going to be needed for it, and it is also incomplete, right? The edge of it doesn't have any supports, whereas the front does, because that's where I was looking at it from when I was entering into it. So yeah, that would have been the computer factory, and that was doing circuit boards, computers, supercomputers, and high-speed connectors. So there was like the first use of manufacturers, I think, in there, just 5 of them. And that's effectively what it did. Alright, so we've arrived at what I would call the first advanced build for the series. This is the aluminum factory. Now, the oil factory kind of became an advanced build over time, with the numerous layers that ended up being piled onto it, but this is really the first one that was designed that way from the ground up. The aluminum factory is the first time I used Excel to actually work out all the volume of goods that was going to be coming into the place, and I wasn't sure how much was I really going to need in terms of aluminum casing and the alclad sheets. I think I settled on the number 1,500 casing and 500 sheets, though knowing I was only actually going to be able to build up to about 75% of that initially, until I went and harvested more. So the first stage of that was actually up there, grabbing as much bauxite as I could. So we can just about see the tip of that building, which is the mining hutch for one of the bauxite mines. And then there's another one in the distance. That gets fed along down that tower into a station and then brought down, as you can see, this strange sort of train ramp, fed along here, and then eventually brought in upstairs. So straight away we had this complicated way of even just getting the materials, but I chose this location due to its proximity to water out in the distance out that side, and some of the other materials that could be sourced locally. Bear with me, excuse me, sorry, like I said, I am sick. Almost over it though now. I've had many coughing fits throughout this video. Right, so the first room is construction. This is where all the raw quartz comes in. So quartz has to be brought in from somewhere else as well on the same train line. Up on that same location, actually. And it's the first time I actually started categorizing groups of machines to separate the belts, because the volume was so high that no matter the belt, one belt wasn't good enough for it anymore, at least at the tier I was at. I think using the max tier belts now, it would be slightly better, but anyway, I digress. So we have A, B, and then up here we have C and D. just these groups of constructors all doing their thing. Now, some of them have yellow bars next to them. They're not actually working, and that's because we can see on our sort of map over here that we have the 4 respective groups, and all the machines are numbered, and they're laid out in the same fashion they are here as they are behind me. And then at the bottom, we can actually see the current output is 487.5, and the target for each respective row is 625. So it's not up to full speed, and the machines that are listed in red are the ones that aren't operating right now. So if you just feed it more quartz, it can get up to speed no problem. It's just a matter of delivering those raw materials at the beginning. But that's not where the categorization ends. Categories are still very important when it comes to the next rooms, which is Foundry. The room is just called the Foundries. So it's split into 4 groups as well, A, B, C, and D, so that we can actually track where all this stuff goes. So we'll just hop up here. And we had used as well coated concrete, painted black and white with a sort of pattern tool to kind of create these walkways going through. And then we use the kind of crenulated walkways to break it up just to make it look like, okay, you have to, you know, watch out here. You're going to be taking steps over something. So it's not perfect. Not everything's hidden away like the other builds, but it's definitely more functional and organized. And also using the metal bars along the bottom was also kind of nice to break things up too. So not perfect, a bit of a hodgepodge of ideas, but oh man, it's actually mispainted as well slightly. But anyway, this travels along to my right into the Foundries room. We've got decent signage here to tell us where we're going. Assembly, recycling, smelting, the eastern exit. This place was huge for me at the time, so it seemed like it needed a lot of different signage to help us guide ourselves around here. So this is the smelting room. It shouldn't actually say smelting. It should say Foundries. I think downstairs says Foundries. Inconsistent. Terrible of me to do that. But effectively, the 4 different groups are represented in here as well. So if we just get some distance, we can see there's the C group, the D group, and down below, obviously, we have A and B as well. And weirdly, I don't think there was an easy way to get downstairs. You have to walk over on that side. But yeah, we can actually see just in the distance there, A, B, C, and D with the machines that are powered on or off. The current output is 420 for each row, and they're all just making aluminum ingots, right? Guess that's what it is. And that's by mixing the silica that we had, I think, and the aluminum scrap, which comes from a different part of the factory. So we'll just move out into refinement. And again, very orderly and organized, and this is where we're actually delivering in through the train station. So the train station just kind of is a floor above us here. God damn, excuse me again. And it brings everything down into these storage containers, filters it down through the floor, and then feeds all that bauxite into the refineries, mixes it with water that comes from the outside. Never ended up putting a wall on this side of it, so follow that pipe all the way along. You get to the water extractors, bring it all the way in, make your aluminum solution stored in fluid buffers, mix that with petroleum coke, I guess, is it? And then you make your scrap. Alright, so the coughing fit is really starting to get the better of me. I'm degrading fast over here, so I gotta speed up a bit before I die. But effectively, we have a huge volume of scrap coming out of these machines, right? These refineries are putting out 300 per minute each, and there's so many of them. In fact, I think some of them are kind of getting backed up down there, but that's, I think, again, because the place isn't fully up to full productivity just yet. Anyways, these travel along into the foundry room, doing their thing, making the ingots that we saw earlier, and those ingots then travel into assembly, where we've got a bunch of assemblers in a row here, mixing it with the copper to produce, I think the casing is made in these ones, overclocked to 111.11%. On the opposite side, they're doing the alclad sheets, I want to say. It's crazy that I put the signs even on the other side. I probably did it with blueprints. Anyway, these are overclocked to 200% each, and this one is underclocked to get us to the right number. Effectively, that all travels out then into this room, where some of it just goes to be recycled, some of it goes up and over the foundry room into the train station. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, some of it just stays in these storage containers. So that's effectively the aluminum production chain. The only thing I didn't show was obviously the copper compartment of that. And that was sort of built temporarily because I'd meant to redo it. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but you can increase the volume with a different recipe for copper using refineries and mixing with water, but I never actually did that. So we could have been getting more bang for our buck out of our copper had I taken the time to mix it with water, but the problem at the time was I didn't have enough power, but we do now, so you could still do that if you wanted to, and just keep those nodes flowing instead of backing up at all. Alright, just while I'm on my way over there, we of course have our transport hub, which has been improved. The old transport hub that was built down in grassy fields was just one side. This one was effectively flipped to mirror itself on both sides, and then the belts and the fuel delivery and all of that stuff was kept hidden in the middle, which worked out way better. So both truck stops are basically just on opposite sides to each other, with the fuel manifold style just being fed to every single truck stop with a walkway, sort of allowing you to kind of just walk between these areas without having to worry about it. You can tell, guys, I'm really struggling for my voice here at this point. I've been drinking water, but it doesn't seem to be making any difference. But anyways, yeah, so the last thing with the truck stops, I'll definitely be using this build in future because I think it looks great. It's very seamless now, how we've managed to put it together. And effectively, we have then the information about how many truck stops, or how many trucks are using it, but also how many truck stops that this truck is going to get those materials. So if it's just going to one mining hutch, for instance, it's just we put a 1 there. But if it's going to 4 different places, it's worth knowing that. It kind of gives you an idea for travel time. And then numbering the different bays respectively and what they're carrying and what's coming out and being fed into trucks, or what's going in if the arrows are facing the opposite direction. So yeah, so I really like the look of this building, the feel of it. And then upstairs we also have drone bays, so other things can be delivered in here too. So I think it's a really dynamic sort of transport hub that I'm definitely going to be using in future, just building the same sort of thing and trying to make it as clean as possible, because I think it could kind of be made even a little bit more clean than this one. Yeah, especially for where the drone hubs are. So we just have floor holes for all of the different truck stations if they need to feed upstairs. They're not aligned that nicely, but the drone bays are aligned pretty well. We can just take a ladder that merges onto the ladder of the drone bay itself seamlessly. And then up here, you know, we've got 8 drone bays in total, which I think is more than enough to bring things in and out. Never ended up using them because I never actually made batteries. And then the train station's on top. So it really is just like a transport hub. It's got every sort of transport catered for. And with lots of potential materials that can come in or out dynamically. So I really do like the idea of this type of thing. And now with the new kind of roads that we'd started building, we're feeding onto them from all different directions. So 4 ways in and out. And 2 ways in and out for the trains. Pretty good. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, you find me just outside of the Crystal Oscillator factory, which is currently undergoing a bit of an upgrade. At least the innards are being exposed right now. That's why we can see some of the machines as we'd stripped away some of the walls and expanded them out. Because this factory was originally doing 60 crystal oscillators per minute, but in building a supercomputer factory later on, I realized I needed a little bit more than that, so it's been upgraded to 105 crystal oscillators per minute, which I never finished doing some of the cosmetics for. So effectively, you chose this location because of its proximity to raw quartz just up there. There's some copper just behind me, and over on the hills, there's some caterium ore, which is pretty much everything we needed. Now, this is kind of an interesting factory because, as you can tell, they just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. But this is really where I started to build on previous ideas. There's not too many new and unique things in here. There is one thing I want to talk about. But as you'll notice, we have the mining enclosures here now, which are blueprinted. We have our standard blueprintable railway that feeds into the place. We have our bridge that carries the materials underneath it and brings it into the factory. So a lot of the previous ideas that I'd done elsewhere are kind of in full effect now here and being utilized to their full potential, kind of. Some of the new ideas, one of them would be the... Well, we'll just run over to it, I guess. It's the basement and then also the logistics kind of hub in the center. Actually, we'll head downstairs first. You can actually see another thing that we've used again is the truck stop. So very same design that we had before, although I'd actually iterated on it for the transport hub to make it a little bit better than it is down here. But I always really liked the basement of this... Careful now. Always really liked the basement floor of this place. Had some parking bays for trucks that were just left there in the background. Always thought that was kind of cool. And then the basement itself over on this side, not using the curved pipes anymore, but instead just straight right angles as we're feeding stuff right up to the refineries up above. So this factory is really busy. We could spend a long time in here, but I want to be kind of quick as the video is going on a bit now. As if you couldn't tell, I've decided to take a pause, and I'm recording this the next day because the voice got the better of me. in that previous factory. I just completely lost my voice when I was getting to here. I just could not talk anymore without coughing, going into a crazy coughing fit. So I felt, okay, I'll just have to stop and resume another day. Which actually is why these videos are supposed to be out every Tuesday, but I'm already late, day one with this one. So hopefully the new series will start on time and be totally fine. Anyways, so we have our rows of refineries all doing their thing. This is the expanded section, as I mentioned. And I was trying to do a lot for the cosmetics on the outside of this building, but that took so much time that that's probably something I'll avoid in future, at least doing it the way I did with this. I think if I blueprinted it, I could have done it a lot more efficiently, but a lot of it was trial and error, so I didn't really get to do that. Anyway, the unique feature of this factory is this room right here. This is a sort of logistics hub inside of the factory. So everything that this factory makes, every single product it makes and takes in, flows into this room. So it's a one-stop shop for if you have a really large factory and you don't want to run around to all your different rooms. You only need to come here to see, is everything flowing correctly? Are you running short of something? Is there a problem? Obviously it's not completely foolproof. You could have a problem on a belt somewhere else, but you'll know in this room if things aren't right. You should know anyway, because you'll notice, like, okay, it's supposed to be 525 out per minute. Is my belt stalling? Is it going too fast? Is there massive gaps on it? You can kind of then figure out, like, okay, something's probably wrong with this line and trace it to where it needs to go. So I like the idea of having these sort of logistics hubs to sort of see all, I mean, it just visually looks nice as well, seeing everything coming in, seeing everything going out. It's kind of cool. So effectively, because I said this place is undergoing an upgrade, the radio control units are no longer being produced. So this room used to have multiple belts on this side as well. So it's basically everything heading out towards the manufacturers to make crystal oscillators. We've got AI limiters, rubber, and quartz crystal. And then we have the oscillators coming back. Now effectively, if we just hop up a bit, there we go. We can see them reaching their first destination. This is obviously where the trains come in. I was trying to do the train station in the middle of the factory where the trains came straight through it and could just go through as a bypass. Not a good idea. I don't think I'm going to do that in future. It was really messy and it still doesn't work quite how I'd like it to. So with the signals and everything, it's built a little bit too crammed in there. But other than that, everything else is pretty good with this place. This is where I started using blueprints to build manufacturers for the first time because we needed so many of them. I never numbered them correctly, at least on this expanded floor here, but on the other floors I did. And there's so many of them. I think there's something like 40 or 50 in total. Maybe even more. And everything is just being fed from the bottom up seamlessly. It's also the first time I started using like different materials between the floors for the factory and the walkways, but no rails in between. I know it's a small thing, but there's something quite nice about just having that clean painted floor be different as the sort of marker for you to know whether or not to cross over, where the machines begin and where they don't. Also, it's the first time I was using these half foundations to create these sort of brutalist style windowsills. Quite like the look of them as well. Definitely will be using those going forward. I think they look pretty good. Very simple as well. It's just half foundations with a painted beam and then 3 windows. Sometimes I did it where there's only 2. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the crystal oscillator factory. The next one is going to be the fused frame factory, and then we'll be done with this place. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, you find me at the Fused Frame Factory, the biggest and most complicated factory I built to date, and probably the most organized. It's one I'm probably the most proud of. It's also completely finished inside, in terms of its logistics and everything. It's full capacity, it's totally running fine. But I didn't finish all of the cosmetics. Again, I got a little lazy, and the back half of the factory doesn't quite look right, and we'll show that in just a moment. But before we get to it, of course, leaning on the fact that we're using the modular mining enclosures again, the modular bridges as part of blueprints that have resources traveling underneath, and then something I actually didn't mention, but you'll see I've been using it throughout, is this sort of stairwell, right? I always do a 3x3 with a staircase wrapping around a sort of a glass central case with a hypertube traveling up the center to allow you to get to different floors. This is just a very small one. This also has resources traveling up alongside it, although the resources sneakily hide away underneath this floor to go in somewhere else. Also, again, more ideas being reused. The sort of shelter that guides part of the railways on the way in, and then I'd never finish the actual well, junction, I guess, as we were leading in. This is also one of the factories that's been totally reclaimed by the world's vegetation. It's totally overgrown now with all these random trees and things sprouting up inside of it. But as we can see, straight away at the bottom here, we have these organizational features at play. We have the import line, the export line, and the gas line, and everything is colored appropriately. Blue for things coming into the factory, red for things going out, and green just as a secondary, I guess, almost, or tertiary if you want to think of it that way. So out the back, again, using that same bridge that travels all the way out to the distance, and that's where we have the nitrogen gas, which is being pumped up from that tower all the way out there in the distance. So at the bottom of that tower, there's nitrogen gas deposits. It's been pumped up and been fed along 3 pipes into the factory at the back. And then on the opposite side, if we just look, well, it's not opposite side of me, all the way out in the distance, just on the opposite side of the factory here from me, there is another pipe that travels that's gathering water. So this factory is really utilizing a bit of everything. You know, there's limestone nodes, there's gas nodes, water, iron, there's train lines coming in to deliver things. It really is utilizing absolutely everything you possibly could, I think, in the game, except for drones to deliver things. But lots of different resource types and ways to handle them, I guess, is the important takeaway. So if we just kind of maybe circle around the side of it here, you can get a quick look at how it looks, because this side is actually partially done. That's the back half, which isn't done, but this side is. And it looks quite nice, I think. It's got the refineries with their chimneys sticking out. I always like to have the smokestacks ventilating out of the building if I can do that. It's not always possible, but if I can, I try to. And then we have this giant tower again with the stairs wrapping around it, the glass case going up the middle. But this one actually, for whatever reason, I can't remember why, but it ended up being wider. It's not a 3x3, it's a 3x4. A little strange. And there's the water from down there, and that's how it kind of makes its way up in a weird squiggly pattern. So let's just hop on in. Using our lovely turbo fuel, gives us nice, great propellant to get up here. But it's kind of cool, at least for me, looking back on all this, seeing all the ideas take shape. You know, the clear delineation in the floors. There's no fencing, but this time I'm using patterns to kind of break it up and make it look like, yeah, there's the construction tape sort of blocking you off from where you should be careful if you're going to be on the asphalt area, which is the factory line, or in the walkable line, which is the coated concrete area. And then, of course, you remember from the screw factor, we had all the hypertubes in the glass. Now they're more nicely spaced out, and they travel between all floors. And they have their names and stuff to tell us where they're going to go. So we're on number 5, assembly. We can just go straight back down to the train station. Get it just thrown out onto it. And then again, using those signs to kind of tell us what these trains are actually doing. We have available slots here, but there's petroleum coke on these two, and then there's aluminum casing, and so on and so forth. So again, I just feel like this factory is really organized. It's quite easy to follow where everything is going. And then the red floors are the floors where things are being made, right? Things going out of the factory, things that are getting made. Whereas the blue floors are the logistics floors. Those are the floors that are taking things in and then giving them to machines, I guess. So if we were to go up to maybe one of the busier ones, let's go up to the busiest one, number 6. The blending and manufacturing logistics floor. It's going to take us all the way up top, and we've got the lovely view out the window as we travel up as well. And here we are then. So this is obviously just going to be a super complicated floor. Well, actually, I think they get more complicated the further down they go, because there's more moving parts. But this is our logistics floor for all the blenders and the manufacturers that are sitting up above us. Now, they're painted based on what's coming in and what's going out. So again, keeping that color scheme all the way throughout. So blue things, this is the lines that are traveling into the factory. Red things, things that are traveling out. So we can follow this all the way down to see where they come from. Or actually, you could just quickly have a look at the actual markings. So we know MF 1 to 32. So I haven't been here in a while, and I know still that that's modular frames, machines number 1 to 32, and they're taking 96 per minute. So that's what's happening there. And then we can track that and just follow it all the way back down to those machines to see which ones are doing it. So again, we can have a look over here and say, there we go, MF number 32, 31, and so on and so forth. And we can see that they're all operational, which ones are supposed to be at 100% or not. These are going to be the encased beams, and they're all numbered and painted correctly. So it's very organized, I must say. If I can pat myself on the back with one thing, this is one of the best uses of color and organization that I've ever done. But it's also one of the reasons it took so long to do. And then as you get further and further down, things just get more and more complicated. And you'll see purple every now and then as a belt, because that's where a blue belt meets a red belt. So say you've got something that's blue, right? It's coming into the factory. and then it doesn't actually ever leave the factory. It wants to circle around and go into another machine. So it came out as a red, but then it transitioned being back to a blue, and that's why it turns purple. And that doesn't actually happen that often, but this is an instance where it does. So here we go. We can see that Refinery's 1 to 6, they're putting out 213.33 copper ingots per minute. It's traveling along a red line because it's coming out of a machine. But of course, it's got to go into different machines. It's not going out of the factory. So somewhere here, just on the bend, it turns purple. The sign turns purple and says, hey, it's easy for me to know that, hey, it's a purple machine. That means that it's come from somewhere, a purple line. Come from somewhere within my own factory. So I'm able to easily check that out. The machines are numbered. We have everything signed. We have little info dumps as well, just in case there's some weird things, you know. The Refinery's 14 to 17 produced 304. 40 of this is split away from this belt, so it's good to know that kind of thing, because there's a complicated splitting arrangement here. So that's just telling me what that's doing. So again, really easy to follow and understand. If it has an X, that means that's where the line ends. If it has an arrow, it means that's the direction it should be traveling, because sometimes I'm underneath it and I can't quite see. Is it going left to right or right to left? So all of it's all very helpful, and then it gets, you know, it needed it. Look how crazy it gets. There's so much stuff going on. So much stuff, so much signs, it got really crazy. And that's basically it, right? That's as complicated as it got. And on the top floor, as we mentioned, we have those blenders and manufacturers. But unfortunately, I never quite finished the look of the factory at the back and the look on top. Just wait for boost to come back and we'll just boost ourselves up. Although we could take the hypertubes on the other side, but here we are, top floor. So it basically just needed a roof of some sort. And then we have our series of manufacturers and our blenders, and they're making fused frames. So I believe the blenders are doing the fused frames. Yeah. And it's full up, 100%. Everything seems to be fine. And I think just downstairs is where that stuff has been stored. Don't know if I have an easy way of getting down there. It's worth looking though, just because I think the one thing this place was missing was a recycling area. So a place where if you're producing just oh my god, a little bit of excess, it's not a problem. So I reserved that space down there for it, and I numbered it for the amount of machines I thought I was going to need. So here we are. Yeah, so that was just a temporary recycler there and there. So effectively this is it. This is where the regular heavy modular frames come. I think it's 40 per minute, and then we have 20, or maybe it's 16 fused frames per minute that then work their way around and into the storage container. So the storage container is 2400 in, it's full. Same with the heavy modular frames, and the rest just make their way into the recycler. And that's effectively it. So the last thing we're going to look at, the last part of our journey, is just quickly checking out Big Shell. Alrighty, here we are then. The project that ended it all. It just became, unfortunately, far, far too big and too complicated. And there's a couple reasons that made it very challenging to finish and even to build and to continue building. That's why you think like, oh, well, it looks like it's mostly in place now. Just like, why not just continue with this? It's because actually building inside of it is incredibly difficult, and I'll talk about why, at least to me. But on the outside, just I thought I would mention, this is the first time I used this sort of mining enclosures again, but this time for oil drilling rigs. And I kind of changed the idea of the overall design for this one and painted it accordingly as well. Same with the actual bridges here. They're slightly different than the ones that we had before. Not too much different, but a little bit. And really liked it. Really thought this came together nicely with the light on the side. And actually the wire travels up inside the pillar and then out from the roof towards the light. So the light can be placed on the left or the right hand side depending on where the deposit is, because it doesn't always line up perfectly on a 3x3 type grid. It's actually a 4x4 blueprint, but it uses a half foundation all around the sides of it. So it's 3x3 in the center, and then a half foundation that runs all the way around it to create that 4x4. And that kind of gives it that nice, I guess the pillars sort of sit inside of it, and the roof looks like it kind of comes out over, when actually it is just a 4x4. So it's quite a nice design. I think I'm really happy with that. I'll probably use that one again. And then a little bit of flair to the edges, you know, using the 1 meter tall wall with some of the railing on top. And then every now and then, you know, some of the, I guess, diagonal pieces, and then additional walls little bit of windows and stuff like that. So just to kind of break it up and make it look a bit more interesting with the new lighting. I keep going on about the lighting, but it really does just make it look so good. And I think windows are going to be a much bigger part of everything I build in future because of it. Now, for those who don't know, just very quickly, this place was designed to be a supercomputer factory, and the reason I built it so big and crazily was to mirror the sort of big shell building from Metal Gear Solid 2. Looks like I might be under attack here, but basically this is the overall idea of it. There are 6 struts, all positioned around a central core building. Don't know why he can't hit me, but he can't. And effectively, each of these are all going to do their own thing, and then there's a series of connecting bridges that have their own logistics mapped out already. So all the bridges are in place except for one, and those bridges all have a certain amount of belts traveling through them, a certain amount of pipes traveling through them, based on what I thought was going to be moving through it when I calculated it in an Excel document, and how things are going to be moving around from it. Strut F was the only one that was actually rendered empty, so it ended up becoming the power strut. Looks like I'm getting attacked. So we had storage containers here just for while I was building it. We're going to make our way over to Strut F. I'll actually travel up the pipe itself. So if we follow along one of the bridges here, we can see a little bit of the work that was done. And a little bit of the internals of Strut F have been done, so you can actually see that now for the first time. Just haven't done it in a video before. So again, just had this bridge, as we've used before, of our mining enclosures / oil drilling rig enclosures. Being dotted around the place. We then had for the first time, these massive pipelines that were being carried along, carrying 9 pipes each between the different struts to transfer fluid on the bottom before it actually got pumped up to the top. And that's to do with gathering all of that oil into one place. It's also to do with gathering as much water as possible. And this is our water farm, as it were, our extractor field. So the bridges continue on out. There was more oil deposits in the distance. You're not really missing anything there, but this is a really nice water extraction field. I actually did this on a stream with the help of viewers. We kind of came together and got a really nice look for the place. I like the kind of standard metal beams that almost look like the structure that's holding all of this stuff in place. Sort of scaffolding, yeah, that's the word. It's kind of scaffolding that are holding all the machines in place together, and that's actually hiding a lot of the what do you call it? The electricity wires are traveling alongside those pipes. God, man, I'm losing my mind. They're traveling alongside those metal beams. And that way, the wiring is kind of hidden for us, just slightly, which I think looks really nice as well. Another thing is that the first time I ever sunk fluid buffers down into the water, I lazily just grabbed the pipes and shifted them over there. I think you could clean up the pipe work. But overall, the idea of walking on top of fluid buffers that are sunken into water, I think looks awesome. Super happy with that as well. So a lot of those ideas were new, first time doing those kind of things, and I think it worked out pretty well, generally speaking, if I didn't cut those corners every now and then. And then inside, that's where all the pipes are just traveling in. Inside we have these, oh my god, it's super dark in here now with lumen. But we've got all of these pumps just pumping everything straight up, so they kind of curve around to an area where, I don't know why I did that, but to an area where we decided to bring everything up. Do we not do that? Oh, we don't do that in here. Sorry, it's in a different one. Yeah, oh my god, it's so dark in here. Yeah, they pipe along that way. This is the central strut that has a huge amount of pumps to carry everything up to the center, and then it gets redistributed again. So I'll just make my way over to that one really quickly. Alright, I'm back at the base pillar. A lot of this was like later blueprinted. I think I did the very first one by hand, and then I tried to look at it and think, okay, what could be blueprinted? So I ended up like blueprinting each wall section, so something like all of this would be like one section, and then you just like paste it around several times on top of a bed of foundations, and that worked out pretty well for doing these pretty quickly, but I never ended up finishing a lot of their connection points to the actual base of the struts themselves as a result of that. Inside we have these giant central pillars that you just walk around to get up to the top. You could obviously just put a hypertube in there. I avoided that just because well, it's kind of an homage to Metal Gear Solid 2. Anyway, so we've got a series of pipes here, all denoting what they're specifically doing. Not that well laid out in comparison to the fused frame factory. Again, I think I was favoring aesthetics over functionality with a lot of this stuff. So if we just make our way up to the very top, if we follow some of these pumps, they're actually pumping away right now, because this place is powered. It actually is producing quite a bit for us. Alrighty, I made it. Okay, so we're in strut A now, which is really just so far a strut that's going to be taking in things and distributing it to other places. So effectively, the only part of this factory that's actually working right now is all of the logistics bridges, except for one, and then the bridge from A to F. So we're just moving from A to F now, and then F is our power strut, which is actually mostly working. Of course, if you were to turn off global illumination, by the way, you don't have to have your flashlight on. It'll be bright. It'll be totally fine. It's just with global illumination, everything's really dark in those pillars. So this is like the only actual area that I got done with. So this is what it would have looked like. So pretty happy with it. I'm using this new sort of seamless lighting fixture to the roof. It's using one of the floodlights, but it's angled completely straight down. And then it's just blended into a bunch of foundations up on top. Then, just to break things up, I've got like kind of random pipes jutting out from various pillars. They don't need to be there, it's just for aesthetics. And as a result, all of these rooms are now super dark. They do actually have lights inside, but I think I've just temporarily disconnected them. I think with a certain amount of wiring up on top, you can reconnect them. The lights will come on again, so it won't be pitch black in here. Nothing too crazy in here. Honestly, it's just a row of refineries. This is probably the most interesting thing, just a little workstation area. So it's effectively just like, I don't know, a series of modern rails, some beams that are painted. You got your equipment workshop, crafting bench, some space for different things. You could put a mom in this type of thing as well, and then it has its own little metal flooring as well. So I just like carving out these little unique areas like that. I think it can kind of look cool. Just move back to the central area, and then across from the central walkway here, again, we just have the central pillar of the strut itself. We again just have the same sort of walkways between each area. And then this was basically going to be a giant room full of generators. And as you can see, they are working right now. Everything is on. This place does get its oil from the surrounding areas, and it is all powered on. So if you did play this save and want to continue this build, if you're crazy enough to do so, all you have to do is follow the diagrams down below and fill the rooms with the respective things that they say they need. And the pipes and everything is actually in place to transport everything between them. So part of the reason why I didn't finish it is because the amount of time it takes to build onto a hexagonal building is just a huge amount of time to then get it to look good. So you have to have a separate floor to cover up the sort of seams between them. I have to figure out how to do rooftops where it blends in nicely together. You could just spam it down and let it clip through each other, but I was trying to do it where it wouldn't, you can't really see the clipping. And just as a result of that, it just means that you're adding hours upon hours of time to every single floor, combining the fact that you have to do this 6 times over and build everything on the center of the core building, as well as bring a train station up into there. Try to do it all seamlessly. It just became too much of a behemoth project, as well as combining the fact that Update 8, when it came out for me, didn't run well, so it stalled my series completely. Because I felt like going back to Update 7, the views are just dropping off like significantly, because the time it took between videos was taking longer because the projects were getting bigger. So it was a real issue, and it's still going to be a struggle even dealing with that as we progress into the next series, the further in we go, because things will just take longer and longer all the time, even if we're doing things more and more efficiently. But I think overall it just became a project that became too big. Just too big. By the time Update 8 got running well, I just felt like I'd burnt out of it somewhat. And it seemed like people weren't as hype about it as I thought they would be. I thought doing a project like this was like, this is going to be really inject a new life into the series, kind of. As you see, some other creators will do videos like this. This build is like the craziest build I've ever done. And you get like, they get a lot of views. But my views just kind of steadily dropped off over time. So as a result of that, I think my series going forward might not even have numbers on it. Because if you number your series, then some people find, oh, episode 50. I'm not going to watch 49 other episodes to see what's going on here, and they kind of bounce off of it. I know that's a little annoying for people who do follow, but there will be a playlist. You can always just follow along that way. But it will be more bespoke. Okay, here's the video dealing with, like, now we're doing oil, and we're going to build an oil power plant, and here's how you do it. And then the next one's going to be the next thing on. Hopefully they'll feel like you're not missing anything if you missed out on 1 or 2 videos. You don't fall off completely. We'll see. That's at least some of the thinking behind it, because it just seems like with this one, learned a lot about when to stop and when not to go too crazy. But if I was doing something like this, I think if you built this from start to finish all in one video, then that's probably how it could be done. But I don't have weeks at a time to kind of put into something like that, really. I don't have an editor or anything like that, and I have other series to tend to too. Not everyone's here just for Satisfactory for me, so just thought I should mention all that, and that's kind of why, part of the reasons anyway, why it's all going to come crashing to an end. Now, combined with a new update, brand new series, hopefully we can get people in at the ground level, and I also know a lot more about the game, like I mentioned, going forward. So I still had a blast doing everything here, and as you can see, hopefully this tour through the world has shown you the things I've learned along the way and things that we've built upon, and how using that knowledge going forward, it should just make for a better series, I think, as well. Alright, so that's going to have to be it for this episode. It's the final episode in this series. Just want to say thanks for everyone who stuck with it all the way through, and all the people that came out to the various streams and stuff, gave awesome ideas, feedback, and all of that. Remember, the save file, the blueprints, it's all going to be in the description. It all works, update 8 or update 7. Doesn't matter. No mods are needed. It will say that it was used using mods, and that's because I had the pack utility mod active, which is still active now, actually. So you don't need it, but if you do have it, it works as well. Totally fine. Alright, that's going to have to be it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you in the brand new series starting next week. Tuesdays will be Satisfactory uploads here on What Darren Plays. Make sure you subscribe and like the video. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.